Welcome back to another episode of SEEK Bytes, a podcast by engineers for engineers where we talk about anything and everything engineering. Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking to Eddy, one of the lead engineers here at SEEK, and the author of the patent Bleeds, what it means for UIs and how we can make even better user experiences. Stick around to find out more. All right, welcome back to another episode of SEEK Bytes. My name is Elliott, and today I am joined by Will.
Hello.
And by Eddy.
Hello.
Eddy, welcome to the SEEK Bytes podcast. So today we're going to be chatting about Bleeds, which is a pattern that I understand that Eddy came up with.
Eddy, I thought it was Leona Lewis.
Oh.
That's Bleeds in Love, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right.
Bleed
Love
in
that.
Love.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's the theme song of Blitz now.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I not so shamelessly stole this when I was working on a front-end pattern, MVCS. I stumbled across this randomly on Confluence, and I was like, this thing is the best thing since sliced bread. So, so Eddy, why don't you give us a quick TLDR on what Bleeds
Well,
is?
maybe before that, Eddy, who are you? What do you do here at SEEK? And
That's crazy
yeah.
talk.
That was, yeah.
Cool. All right. I am Eddy, and I'm a lead engineer in a team called Candidate Management in the selection subdomain. So this is my main gig. I also am a open source developer for the Guild and the maintainer of GraphQL code chain, which we also use at SEEK. And like I'm really huge in that open source space, especially for GraphQL, and I'm a GraphQL ambassador of this year, one of the big teams. So very excited to be here and talk about Bleeds mainly. Yeah.
Did Bleeds come about from some of the GraphQL stuff, or just from front end development in general?
Yeah, from front end development in general, but some of the ideas kind of come from a library like Apollo client, which is part of the GraphQL, I guess, like ecosystem that kind of like kickstart some of that thinking. And when I look broader outside of that library, that's the kind of principle that Bleeds has. Is all the UI states that comes with it. Yeah.
I think, now back into to what Elliott asked. What is Bleeds?
Bleeds started as a, I guess, like guideline, not so much of a framework, right? Like it's one way we want to communicate within our team, within like our product team, about how we want to present our application, front-end application to our users in a way that's helpful for them and in a way that like users are used to in a modern application. Yeah, so like at a very high level, Bleeds are the abbreviation of the UI states. We got blank state, we got loading state, error state, expected state, disabled state, and a very special S at the end for static state, which is part of like static rendering that we use very often at SEEK.
So those states are kind of the way we would describe the application state goes through at various points throughout the user journey. So you said static, and from my understanding, if we're talking about front ends, right, you get this static generated code usually from a single page app that gets kind of served up first. So is that what we're referring to when we say static?
Yeah, that's correct. That's basically the first or the index.html that gets sent over the wire. Before any of the application functionalities kicked in, right? So a lot of the time you see that like when you load a page, it's gonna be like a lot of skeleton loader, like kind of shimmering effect, and without any state about who the user is or anything related with login or like so basically the state without any information. However, it kind of gives the user a glimpse of what the application may look like once it's finished loading all the initial functionalities, right? So when that happens, we don't want the UI to jank or like a lot too much, right? Like to move around excessively so that the users will still have a very good experience, right? because they kind of expect something will pop up in those loading placeholders.
Yeah, I've certainly seen a lot of janky UIs over the years where there'll be a loading animation and then boom, suddenly you kind of get punched in the face with content that loads. So the static state really is kind of synonymous with like a skeleton loading pattern then?
Yeah, it's very similar, but within Bleed, we want to call it out very explicitly because that's something that engineers will have to handle. So within SEEK, we have a framework called SKU that we use to build majority of our front-end applications. And because it's using static rendering, so we can control when the application stops and render the static states, right, before everything else kicks in. So like if we want to be really aggressive, we just render a loading spinner and send it to the application, or we can want to control that, right? We can move that loading spinner a bit lower and kind of render the page skeleton with all the right layouts. It's all kind of controlled by us. Now, for the loading state, is kind of similar, but I would say that it should be triggered by some actions that happens on the page. Like a button is clicked to paginate between a list, right? So that's the loading state of that list. So yeah, like even though they look similar and may serve similar purposes, I have more success calling them out so that to focus our engineers on thinking about the static state and loading state in different context, to help them code the application better.
I've certainly seen over the years some static states that are just the screen is blank until the client side hydration happens, and you're just like, for a fast internet connection running locally, you don't notice the app's just there. But if you're on a slow connection, you're like, this is a really bad user experience. The page is just completely blank until 7 gigabytes of Node.js or JS bundles load rather.
But this wouldn't be just about whole pages, right? We could also take it down to component level of stuff with components loading, but particularly now with more like kind of dynamic loading of things. I see like this could not just be helpful for developers, but designers as well. When thinking about the state of a certain component or an application, whatever it is, I like the Bleeds acronym because it's like, these are all the things that we should account for: errors, loading, starting, which is good. How do you guys use it in your team to, I don't know, bring something to life?
Yeah. So I like that you touch on the collaboration with the designers part because before Blitz, we were living in a world where we got the design, right? And then we tried to implement it. And then what happened is our tooling is saying that you need to also handle data loading and error. And we go and look back at the design that we got. And I'll say majority of the time, we only have the expected state.
So you just get the happy path in your design as opposed to this is what it should look like once the user clicks the button or if an error happens.
Yeah, and that is where we kind of want to put this into like principles and share around with our designers. And this didn't start as a conversation with our engineers at the start. So I started working with the designers, talking with them through my thinking about these like states that we need to build our application and kind of like get them on board, right? To talk the same language. And to do that as well, I wrote a blog post and to explain my thinking. Here's what we mean by blank states, loading, error expected, and so on. To get them on board, and like from there, we use the Bleed as almost like a contract between designers and engineers, where at the time of handover, we use it to like checklist, like you got a blank state here, what happened when there's an error, and so on. And if something's missing, we can collaborate and we can choose how we handle errors, for example. So yeah, it can serve as a very high level principles that we think about and less about tooling or the things, how we apply it, right? Because designers can think about those in their concepts, right? And engineers may apply tooling and ways to do it. But higher level principle, we agree on a common language and what we mean by one UI state.
Before we delve into some of what those other states mean, I just want to circle back to static. So Will mentioned kind of the component level. So when we're talking about static, does that also mean static elements within components? So it's not necessarily tied to the initial static render of the app, but like, labels on a form, for example, those are static elements that are always there.
Oh, yeah, that is very interesting. I always thought about it from the static rendering parts, right? But that is an interesting thought, and I love how this is evolving outside of the initial thinking. But totally, yeah, if something is static, we may have to do some treatments on it and make sure that it's truly static, for example. Thinking about it more like we're in a React world now where we got server components, right? And a lot of things that render on the server is the representation of data that sometimes are just static, right? So that's interesting thought. Thanks, Will, for bringing that up. Yeah, I like that.
I don't know what I said. That was Elliott. Thank you for making my words sound good, Elliott, I guess.
You're welcome. I know for server-side rendering, right? Would we also kind of lump static in there, or say no, not so much, and just kind of like put the boundary around static as that initial render, as opposed to static HTML that gets returned to the client from SSR?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, like in my thinking, that the static part of it would be the very first thing that the user sees, right? And for majority of our use case, it's always been like a loading spinner. But with the evolution of server components and SSR, those don't have to be static components or like loading-ish elements. They can be whatever the server sent us, right? And it may change as you interact with the server. So I guess to kind of boil it down, it's basically what the server sends to the client, and maybe without any functionalities. It's kind of like what you see, what you get from the client, from the server.
I like that. I think that's a really good encapsulation of that state, because there's a bunch of different things that could probably fall under that category. But I think the core one is, you're in that initial loading state, which is kind of, it's different to the L bit of bleeds, right? Which sounds like is much more of the user has done an action and we are waiting for the client side application to do something, or waiting for some asynchronous process. But it's largely driven by a user action, as opposed to we're waiting for that initial kind of load of the application.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I know some of our tooling also makes this a little bit easier as well. Like you mentioned Apollo earlier, and like those for a very long time have, particularly when you're using the hooks, have loading or is loading or whatever they have to which is funny because a lot of these I've kind of thought about before when making UIs and using those tools, because they kind of have them built in. Is there an error? Is there loading? Is there whatever it is? But it's nice kind of seeing it represented in a way to be able to communicate to designers and other non-technical people, because so they kind of know what we have available to us as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think like one thing I think about Blitz is it's basically just a written down version of what we all have in our heads, right? We've been working in the web space or the native space for a really long time. And everyone has this kind of ideas of what good UI looks like and how it behaves. But I just happen to be the guy that writes it down and I guess like publicize it a little bit, mainly so that I don't have to repeat myself when in these like conversations.
Sorry for maybe coming up.
No. But I really like that you kind of put it like that, because it's in everyone's mind, so it's a lot easier to kind of explain it, and people are like, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking about as well, and it's useful to kind of scale the thinking. When someone joins our team, I'll be like, yes, here's the doc. We can talk about more about like what it means and things, but here's how we build our UI, right? So there's less contention and more consistency, and I guess like less hands-on from my part to scale the team if everyone kind of follow bleeds.
Typically, you would think about just the final state, right? We've kind of mentioned that. Sometimes you get designs that's just the final state. But I feel like that's the ideal goal, right? If you just load a page and you just get that state. Obviously, I like that bleeds, shows that there's more to it and that really the web has a lot going on. Things could happen, errors can happen. But I'm seeing as well that like there are tools nowadays that are trying to cut some of these out. Like the loading state is one that I know with optimistic loading, we can maybe try and cut that state out entirely for some things, clicking save and showing the change. How, I don't know, have you kind of looked into some of that stuff and how does that kind of fit into kind of the bleeds pattern as well?
Yeah, totally. So that's very interesting. And when Bleed started, it doesn't mean that you kind of have to ensure there's every single state in the application, but those are the state that you may get into, right? So even for optimistic updates, like let's say you send a message and that message may show up on the screen as an optimistic update, meaning the other person hasn't received it, right? One treatment I usually see for this kind of optimistic update is like the application would treat it slightly differently, like putting a like a gray instead of a white for the text, right? Is to kind of indicate, and maybe this is so ubiquitous now that the user of this chat application, I think that's what we're talking about, you kind of expect that when it's gray, it means it's sending. So that's still kind of the loading state.
You're right. It's kind of more. It is more like an optimistic loading, isn't it? It's like this. This is what we think is going to happen, but you're right. We really should still be showing that it is loading, because if something goes and has to undo, we need to make that clear to the audience. Yeah, true.
Yeah, and on top of that, we may want to like consider like there's very different levels of loading in here, right? Like let's say we get the response in 200 milliseconds, which is like an expected level of request sending. We may choose not to show the gray text at all. But after 200 milliseconds, we know that something's wrong with the network, and we may choose to communicate to our user that is still sending, so please wait for us. So what that means is like 90% of the, or 95, 99% of the users will not see the gray state at all, but it's still part of the loading UI that we kind of control when we build the application.
Yeah, I don't think there's a pattern that's been picked up very much as well. The optimistic loading or updating or whatever it is. Yeah, it's which I like it, but I feel like it is more work to get that stuff done.
Yeah, and this is what makes Apollo clients really fun to work with, because they kind of solve these problems. I wouldn't say already, but there's a lot of support and tooling in Apollo client. I don't want to be like Apollo client shield or anything, but but like the teams at Apollo really thinks about all this interaction and provide us like really good documentations to make it happen, right? Like I built a chat app in my last company, and like just using Apollo clients as the backing, I guess, tool for the whole clients, and it's really fun to work with. Yeah.
Having used a few different graph implementations, Apollo seems to have a really good approach to it, where it's like you run your mutation or your query, and you kind of got three things that you're going to get back. It's like, here's your data, here's your loading state, and here's your error state, and you may get n number of those back, right? And then you as the consumer of that result have to decide. It's like, well, if loading's now false, but data and error are true, it's like, well, what state are you in? You're kind of in a partial state, but it forces you to think about that. You get more rich data from knowing that there could be multiple different states, rather than just, no, you hit API and get response. there's one state there that's kind of on top of these, which I want to drill into a little bit. So the blank state. So how would we define that blank state?
Yeah. So the best way to think about it is we make a request, we get some data back, but that data is empty, right? So we have to show the UI in a way that clearly communicates that there's no data for the request that you have made. And as a bonus, is there anything you could do to get out of the blank state? I'll give an example, and this is not to like talk bad about this system or this website or anything, but so if you go to NPM and you go to your access tokens page and delete all your access token, what you see is a blank state of a table, an empty table with just heading, and at the bottom it will say item 1-0 out of whatever, right? So as a user, when I first use NPM and go to that page, I wasn't sure what I'm supposed to do there, right? Like I have no token, but I don't know if it's loading. I don't know if there's some errors that happen, right? And that's the kind of thing I want to avoid our user to experience, because we're more of a product engineering, a product company with really strong engineering culture, right? So I want our users who's using the platform to be able to see that, okay, I don't have, as a hirer, right? I don't have any applications in my job at the moment. Can I do something to get more applications? Like I can either change my filtering aspects if I already have applications but they're not in the filter, or I can like do something extra so that I get more applications to my job, right? So that action on a blank page is also very important to get the user to a state where it's in the happy state.
And how is that different to starting, the S in bleeds?
Yeah.
Blank and starting. They sound similar, I guess, in the wording, but how does that fit?
Yeah. So I guess the main thing is the blank states just mean that you already fetched the data, and when you get the data back, it's an empty set of data. That means logically there is no data to be shown to the user. However, the static state, what that means is like we haven't even make a call yet, so we don't know whether we could show them or not. And sometimes some applications will not even check like tokens or auth before they show the static state page, right? So maybe on the static page, there will be some loading spinner, and then it makes a call to the backend and get back an error, right? So that they can show the error page there. Yeah.
So is starting, I guess, in the flow, is starting meant to be before blank? Is that where that fits?
Yeah. It's supposed to be like the first thing that when you load the page, that's what you see.
Right, before the call's been made.
Yeah, exactly. But it's at the end because S bleed doesn't sound as cool.
Definitely. Okay, that makes sense.
That's it is a nice differentiation, and I think you could, if you say looked at the SEEK homepage, for example, you could kind of see that where it's like, well, it will load in, you'll get your header, your footer, you'll probably see where jobs will come up, and then once that initial client-side hydration happens, it then makes the call to be like, what job should I be showing by default without having done a search, whether it's promoted jobs or recommended jobs based on your kind of user info. But if we had nothing to show, we would want that blank state to be really good, to kind of be like, here's where jobs will appear, type in a search or some sort of informative action for the user. This kind of leads me to the error state after this. So what I've seen over the years is sometimes we will just do red for any sort of error. And the problem I see with this is if you do it for all errors, then how does the user know when it's their turn to do something? And I feel like there should be a couple of different error states. So one is where a system error's happened, and it's like you didn't do anything wrong as the user, but to correct this error, contact support or try and refresh the page or do something. And I've seen the knee-jerk reaction from developers is just be like, display red error text that says an error happened. And it's like, that doesn't help the user. They can't get out of that. Whereas when it is the user's fault, such as, form validation, and you say, oh, well, I'm going to enter a phone number, and you put a, non-number in there, and it says, hey, you can't do this, red, you need to action this as the user. I think those are two very clearly different handled patterns within the kind of error field.
Could you imagine if users got errors like us developers do, where just a giant red flash with your whole entire screen's covered in what the error is? There you go. That's the third error state.
Yes.
The whole application blows up.
Yeah, you get sent to like a 500 page instead of just like a red text.
Yeah,
that's
happens.
How we'll do it.
Well, the old IIS website and ASP.NET, you'd like if you had the settings incorrectly, you just get, here's a giant stack trace of like stuff. Like your whole page would die and it would just be like, here's dev stuff. And you'd be like, what? What just happened?
Rough.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you handle errors?
Yeah, I like what Elliott was talking about, like different version of error state for sure. And that's what I'm not sure if it's really highlighted in the blog post, but a really important part of error state is to help users to get out of that state, right? The more specific we could get to help them, the better. Like, for example, the validation on the input, right? That's really contextual to something that they've done and really close to where the error is. In my team, we always kind of think about how big the error state is and how we can help our users to get out of those states, right? We also handle our data, like from the graph, in a way that they all can partially fail. So let's say we have a list of applications to show up, right? And our server for applications may go down, right? So we will only show a error state where something's wrong with loading applications in that spot, that where applications will show up. But the job details at the top of our application, of our page, is still able to load, right? So it really helps our users to say, oh, something's wrong with the application list. And then they contact our support. So that really help our engineers to kind of focus on the problem as well, rather than just a big red text where we actually don't even know what really happened.
I've certainly seen over the years the knee-jerk kind of reaction to any error happening from developers to be just throw an exception.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue with that is, if you get an error result back from Graph and then you just say, I'm just going to throw an error because an error happened, it's like, so who are you expecting to deal with this error? Like at the application level, and the further away from the source of the error it goes, the less context you have, right? So when you're saying the form thing is very contextual, right? It's like, yeah, there is an error on this particular field of the form. You can deal with it there, that error state of that field. Whereas if you just say, and like maybe the validation was from an async network call, right? So it's not a client-side validation. It's I've sent the form off, it's come back and said this field is incorrect. You can still deal with it in that context. Whereas if you just throw the error, you're like, so how do we now communicate to the user that something's gone wrong other than just hard crashing the app or being like, oh, we'll catch it at the root level so the app doesn't die and it's just error has occurred. Good luck.
Yeah. And I've seen some examples where like we have a form and if something goes wrong, then it all kind of goes up at the top of the form where they list out like a bunch of errors, right? And then as a user, I would get like a bit thrown back because I now have to read this list of errors like a developer and then I try to match them back to each field that and sometimes they're not even highlighted red, right? So we try to avoid doing that to our users and making sure that they understand where the errors is as quickly as possible.
So Bleeds really is around user experience at the end of the day. Like that's all it is. It's around capturing what states the app could be in so that we can provide a better user experience, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct. And it's also about communicating like really clearly to our users what our app is doing and doing it in a way that is useful for them. And they can expect certain things from the app. I think these days there's a lot of modern apps that does this really well, and people expectation is going to be really high when they use any of the web or native apps these days. And Bleeds is trying to level the playing field for all of the applications. And when we build apps at SEEK, that's what we, or at least in my team, we try to ensure the best experience for our users. Definitely.
We've covered most of the letters of Bleeds. I thought maybe we really, there's only two left. One of them is expected, which I think we've kind of touched on quite a bit, what we really expect. The other one was loading, right? How, obviously there's a lot of loading states. We touched on like skeleton states and stuff. But how do you typically handle loading with, like, do you have a preference on loading with skeleton states or, just a spinner, or I suppose what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like I think it's a progression. If we just don't think about loading state at all, like it could just be like a blank, white bit on the page. But then like we can add loading spinner to kind of indicate that it's loading. When that loading switches to the expected state, then there's a lot of differences in the UI, right? So that's good, but if we can go a bit further, and it doesn't take a lot more work, that's where we got like the skeleton or like the shimmering effects come into play. And that's where and this is like everywhere in a lot of apps these days. So that's where we can really see, okay, I'm seeing these a few boxes on the page, and I know that these boxes will be filled with actual data when they come back. Yeah, that's how I would handle it. And in a pinch, I would still put a loading spinner. So like having a treatment is better than not having a treatment.
Mm.
If in doubt, use a loading spinner.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's, so going from loading to expected, obviously that's what we want. But it could go from loading to error, where nothing even, like if there's just a total network outage, how would you typically handle them?
Loading, error, and expected are the three main state of Bleeds. Within our like development workflow, right, we have set up our like servers to handle these states, allow our engineers to handle these in all of the scenarios. Like we have a mock API where we can control how long the loading state is, how often it throws error, to kind of simulate what it would be in a real application, right? Like before this, we just would have like a really quick, almost instant loading experience, right? But like when we push it to production, we started to see or not see the loading spinner. And so like we started to incorporate some of the Blitz into our like setup to make sure that engineers kind of think about these states. But coming back to the question, what was the question again?
Yeah, like how would you handle loading into an error state?
Yes. Loading into an error state is basically kind of similar to the error conversation that we just talked about. If let's say we're loading a list, and if that list fails, then that could be, depending on how it fails, right? That could be like a full failure where users must reach out to support to kind of understand what's going on, right? Then we show a text to help guide them to call our support. And then there could be things that, let's say, the list loads well, but there's some data that's missing. So there's kind of a few treatments here. Let's say if that data is not critical, then we can try to hide it at the risk of the user thinking that that data is never going to be there, right? There's some treatment where we put a message, like contextual message saying some data in this item is not loading correctly, right? Like we're trying to fix the problem. So in that case, it's a bit more verbose and it may trigger more alarm in the user's head, but we're still communicating that something's wrong. And I would usually use that information for more critical information to help guide the users a bit more.
So what about disabled? That's, I think, kind of the last state we haven't really captured. So can you quickly summarize for us when should it be an app be in the disabled state?
I didn't write that one down. That's why I didn't bring it up.
Yes, disabled. This is where users cannot do an action, right? Like if you see a button and then that button is grayed out, and when you put your cursor on it, there's like that stop icon where you can click on it, right? That's to communicate to the hirers to the users that you cannot click up this button for some reasons. And ideally, there's some contextual text there saying why you cannot click on it. And usually the user can kind of figure it out by themselves as well. Now, in those cases, a separate, a separate treatment of a disable is just to not show the button at all, right? And again, it's kind of coming back to how critical this button is, right? Like if it is something that critical to the user, we want to show it to indicate that you can do this action, but not now. Right. Otherwise, if they don't see this button, they go into our app and they kind of looking at the app and say, "What do I do here? Like I can't even do this main action. I don't know how to trigger it." Right. So it depends on what kind of treatment we want to give to very specific elements on the page to kind of guide our user.
Can disabled states be bad as well? I mean, I've seen like clicking submit and it's disabled, but there's no loading state. And now people are like, well, what is happening?
Yeah.
Or why is this taking so long? Or
Yeah, totally. And something like this can be a combination of the states, right? The button is disabled, but the loading state can be like a ... within the button or just a loading spinner right next to it, right? So that very contextual, that this button's loading, but it's also saying that this whole form is submitting. So hang on, we'll get back to you soon with the new data and any success or error messages.
Yeah, I feel like the more you kind of think about these states, the more you can kind of even realize some more. Like even from that loading state, there is a loading too long. Like how do we communicate that something is just taking longer than we need? You did mention it earlier, but I guess there's definitely a lot of layers to bleeds that I think just thinking about it just in this terms really does help your just see the whole picture of how a UI can kind of develop and change. And I think it's great. Thank you for creating it.
You could kind of say that some of those states bleed together a
Oh,
little bit.
Look at that. Here we go.
I love it.
Yeah, where can they find the article and where can they find you? Not, online.
Yes, so the article is on SEEK blog post and it's called Using Blitz to Build Better UI. And there's, all the things we talked about, like each state alternative name and some suggestions on how you can apply it to your team, to your software development lifecycle, and to communicate to designers and product managers in your team as well. And you can find me. So I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Discord, all with like the same handle name, Eddy with triple E and 888. And I'm doing a bit of YouTube talking about GraphQL and things like that. So you can always check out my channels.
I will be cyber stalking you after this to look at all the things.
I love it. Thank you for joining us, Eddy.
No worries. Thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
All right. Thanks, Eddy. We will see you next time, gang.